Morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. So we're due some more people to join us, but we're going to get going in the interest of everybody's time. So
reacting to the victory in the early hours of this morning.
Thanks very much for coming along. So what we're going to cover this morning is digital accessibility. And my colleague, Emily Smith, who's our Assistive Technology Coordinator, is going to be running the workshop. So I'm just doing a very brief introduction and then I'll be handing over to Emily. So obviously digital accessibility is a really important element for us of universal design and the entire University for All initiative. So University for All is our whole institution approach to access and inclusion in UCD, and our digital environment is a really core element to that. So Emily, as I said, is our Assistive Technology Coordinator. Her research interests are very much in digital accessibility and universal design. And this training is really practical, really useful for everybody across the university. We're recording the training this morning, so you'll be able to share it with your colleagues afterwards as well, and the materials, which I'll post into the chat shortly. But this training, I suppose, is just one element of our approach to universal design. And what I'd encourage you all to do, if you haven't done so already, is to complete our 1 hour introduction to universal design in UCD. So that training incorporates some elements of digital accessibility, but broader than that, gives you a good introduction to the University for All initiative and the other practical things we can all be doing on a day-to-day basis to embed access and inclusion into our work. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Emily, and she's going to teach us all about digital accessibility. Thanks very much, Emily.
Thanks very much, Lisa. So I'll get my screen shared and we will get going. Cool. So you are all really welcome to this presentation on accessible communications and promoting digital inclusion in UCD. As Lisa said, my name's Emily. My pronouns are she and her. So I recognize some faces, other folks I haven't seen before. So in the interests of universal design, I'm going to just stop and say, how would you like to learn today? So I've asked Lisa to post my slides in the chat there. The reason for this is so you don't have to watch my screen share if you don't want, so you can customize the slides if you use assistive technology, and so you have them to refer back to later. The workshop is also being recorded, and we do have live captions available as well, so you can turn those on your Zoom toolbar. I'm going to be chatting away and I'm going to be asking you questions. So the chat box is very much open. Lisa and Daniel, I'd ask you to be my co-pilots on this. And if anyone's posting in the chat, feel free to interrupt me. Similarly, if the chat box isn't accessible to you, do feel free to call out. I really don't mind. Okay. And then at the end of this session, I'm going to be employing the principles of UDL, and I'm going to be asking you to tell me your +1. When I say your +1, what's this one small change you're going to make today to promote digital inclusion in our university? And that could be something really minor, like sharing the workshop with a pal, or it could be maybe making changes to how you do your slides, maybe making a master deck for your presentations that's a little bit more accessible going forward. You don't have to be a tech whiz kid to be good at digital accessibility, and that's something that I really want to stress today. Okay. So in the session, we're going to start by actually imagining exactly what we mean by digital inclusion. We're going to have a look at how the principles of universal design for learning actually align with the requirements of digital accessibility as outlined in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Sorry, what?
Your mom thinks her flight's delayed.
Okay, we're going to look at really practical things that we can do today. And then we're going to look at our +1s going forward. So first up, I want to take you on a digital journey through UCD. Okay, so our campus very much extends beyond Belfield and Blackrock. Okay. Our campus actually begins with our website. If you imagine the journey of a student coming to UCD, it starts by looking at our prospectus online, okay? When it comes to registration, we're doing it through SysWeb, we're doing it online. How do we mostly communicate with our students? Through their email. Where do we find our classroom resources? On Brightspace. Even information about conferring is conveyed online, okay? So it's really important that when we're actually imagining an inclusive university campus, we realize that our digital systems are integral to that. There are very few things you can do in UCD today exclusively on pen and paper, okay? So really broad question, but why does digital accessibility matter? Okay. First off, it's equity of access to digital information. Imagine that you're trying to book a dentist appointment. First thing you do is probably Google their phone number, or you actually send an email to request that appointment. Everyone needs to be able to access digital information in a way that works for them, whether that be on a mobile device, whether that be on a computer, whether that be via screen reader. We all need to be able to get to our information. First impressions matter. So as I said, most of our recruitment now is done online. It's done via social media. It's done on websites. It's done via webinars. If our setup in those initial stages is not inclusive, if a student with a physical disability cannot navigate our website, if a person with a visual impairment cannot navigate our website, if someone who only has a mobile phone cannot access our website, we are telling them, you're not welcome in UCD. We don't anticipate students like you, okay? Living by our values, we claim to be a university for all. And as I've outlined, our university includes our digital spaces. Leading by example. Again, we are doing so much research nowadays in the field of EDI, in universal design, in digital technologies. It's important that we model them in our digital presence. Freedom and independence. So as someone who works with students primarily with physical and sensory disabilities, we do a lot of work to equip them with assistive technologies so they can go about their college lives the same as everyone else. Having worked with these students, I can tell you there is nothing more disheartening than having to go and find a member of admin staff or asking a classmate for assistance to complete a task that everyone else is able to do by themselves. And more often than not, it's because the way the information has been formatted is not accessible. It's a huge time sink for the user. And it's also, again, signaling we don't anticipate students like you. And then we have a legislative and ethical responsibility to make sure that our digital content is accessible. So as of 2020, we are subject to the EU Web Accessibility Directive. Okay, that's a set of standards for public service bodies that says that our digital content should meet the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines requirements. Okay, so that is a big long list of ways that our websites should be usable. It includes our Brightspace, it includes our internal systems. So there is a way of measuring our inclusion. Okay. So what we're really striving for is a digital campus as inclusive as our physical space, okay? So I want to put this to you now, just 1 minute, throw it in the chat, hop on the mic. What does an inclusive digital campus look like? Okay, so think about Brightspace, think about our registration systems, our library, our social media, and how we convey information both to students and to colleagues as well in general. So what does an inclusive digital campus look like? Cool. So we've got some feedback in the chat here. So all students can engage fully with their lecture materials. Absolutely. So that might be our students who are commuting, who are maybe using mobile phones, might be our students who use assistive technology. Material is accessible and understandable to everyone. Absolutely. Easy to navigate, huge one. Really, really important. Single accessible point of information for all faculty and staff. Yes, absolutely. So we often talk, particularly in e-learning, about the idea of a one-stop shop, the idea of everything nicely laid out, easy to navigate, easy to find, content on Brightspace, no PDFs. So if you want to hear about my hatred of PDFs, please do come to our YouTube channel. All students have the tools they need, and we expect diversity. Absolutely. Accessible IT, no barriers. Yeah. Brilliant. Making sure everyone has access to technology, a place where everyone can succeed. Love that. Yes. Okay. So we're very much on the same wavelength here, folks. So yeah, accessible, usable. I do think it's important to talk about accessibility, so being compliant, but then also making sure it's usable, making sure people have instructions, people have the knowledge to engage with these technologies. Yeah. Flexibility and choice. So we don't all work in the same ways. We're talking about equity of access. So it doesn't have to be identical channels to get to the information. Okay. Values all learners. So I was really glad to see people talking about anticipating diversity, recognizing diversity in our university, and also one that is student-centered. Okay. So a lot of you will be familiar with our University for All initiative at this point, but just to flag that the digital space is a distinct pillar within our vision of an inclusive university. Under the pillar, we're thinking about how can we ensure that we are WCAG compliant? How can we make sure that our digital systems, whether that be SysWeb, InfoHub, or our Brightspace, are all usable? Diversity in our digital content. So I know a lot of you have taken on the UDL badge, you've done your multiple means of representation, you're thinking about videos, you're thinking about podcasts, you're thinking about maybe a little bit of articulate storyline and interactive modules, and then broadening access to assistive technologies. And I'll chat about that a little bit later in this session. So we've touched on it already, the idea of the barriers to our digital campus, but I just wanted to do a summary of sort of what kind of barriers we do see on a day-to-day basis for our students. So first of all, we need to recognize that digital accessibility, although we talk a lot about students with disabilities, and that is the cohort I primarily work with, digital accessibility is also a socioeconomic issue. Okay, so we saw that in COVID. Not all our students have laptops, okay? Digital poverty is a reality. We know statistically that most of our students access Brightspace most frequently using a mobile device. Now, in some cases, that's because of convenience. In others, it's because students do not have their own laptop, or they share laptops with siblings or family members, okay? We also know from our remote learning period, and even now our hybrid learning period, not all of our students actually have private spaces, and that's still a reality on campus. We have students who maybe want to take counselling appointments, doctor's appointments, or who have maybe even job interviews. They don't necessarily have somewhere to go and take those calls that's safe and private, okay? Literacies. So we need to recognise that digital literacy is also a socioeconomic issue. We know that for instance, in DESH schools where there may be a lack of staffing, students don't necessarily have that dedicated support person to sit and look at assistive technologies with them. They may not have digital whiteboards in classrooms. A lot of our students may be experiencing technologies for the first time when they come to UCD. We can't assume a similar level of digital literacy for everyone. Similarly, our students particularly those who are distanced from education, may be lacking the institutional knowledge to really jump into our digital systems and get going. I mean, when I first started working in UCD, I was very much like, what's a SysWeb? You know, we use a lot of jargon, particularly when it comes to our digital realm, okay? So accessibility, so inaccessible design choices, and not considering web content accessibility guidelines when we're actually selecting our digital tools. So it's wonderful that a lot of us now are getting on board with things like Mural or Kahoot or Quizlet or Padlet, but you need to make sure that these tools are accessible to begin with. So there's something called a VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility template. And that will tell you, would someone on a mobile phone, would someone who uses a screen reader, would someone who maybe uses eye gaze or keyboard shortcuts be able to engage with this tool? So keep that in mind when you are selecting your digital tools. Don't box yourself into an inaccessible space to begin with. And then communication. So sometimes it's just when we ask someone to complete an activity online, we haven't given good instructions. We haven't set our expectations. We haven't given them the tools to go and do the task, okay? So step one in digital accessibility, stop assuming an average user, okay? So later on today, I would love, and this could be your +1, I would love for you to take a step back and think, what assumptions do I make about my students, my colleagues, my peers, when it comes to the digital world? What habits and knowledge, that could be digital or institutional, do I take for granted? And I'll be open, I'll put my hand up. I'll say, earlier this week, I met with a student. We were doing AT training. There I was chatting away. And I kept talking about a desktop. I kept saying, save it to your desktop, be easier to find. The student did not have a clue what a desktop was. And that was on me. Because as well, they were used to saving things to their cloud technology. So when I was saying desktop, they were there going, but I've always used an iPad. I've always used my phone. So really small example, but it happens to the best of us. We assume knowledge that may not be there, okay? So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your digital environment. So in case it wasn't obvious, we're going to be using UDL to think about digital accessibility. So UDL, if you haven't done the badge, please do it. We're running a pilot this term as well on our Universal Design for Student Support, which I'm really excited about. Please get on the Universal Design train. So Universal Design works on the basis that there is no average user, or in the case of teaching, that there is no average student. 3 pillars: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. And really what Universal Design does is it says, how do we accommodate the most people in the easiest way? How do we offer flexibility and choice? How do we integrate flexibility and choice into everything we do? Okay. So this is the techiest that we're probably going to get. I mentioned the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's a really lovely big document with all the standards, but it is distilled down into the acronym of POUR. Okay, so perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I've got a little hack for you where if you are already engaging with Universal Design, it becomes a lot easier to integrate POUR into your digital work. Okay, so looking at the concept of perceivable, what we're saying here is, can everyone perceive the information being presented? So if I were to start thinking about the census, maybe I want a student to complete a scholarship application and I'm giving them instructions. So maybe I'm going to give them written instructions so they can read it off the screen. But then I'm also maybe going to do an audio recording of the instructions, or I'm maybe going to signpost to them a tool that they can use to listen to my instructions. Maybe I'm also then going to do a flowchart for the student to follow my applications. I'm giving them choice, and that's my multiple means of representation. Operable. So can the interface, whether that be maybe my Articulate Storyline module on my Brightspace, or whether that be my application form, can everything be engaged with and easily navigated? So keep in mind that not everyone uses a mouse, okay? If you have a student who maybe uses a screen reader or someone who has a physical disability, they may be using keyboard shortcuts or they may be using eye gaze technology. So a good way to get around testing that is if you have a tool, so for instance, the Storyline file I mentioned, if you use your tab key and your enter key, can you click your way through that activity? Okay, and that's our multiple means of representation and also our multiple means of expression. So we all express ourselves in the digital space in different ways. Understandable. The information is clear and the instructions are there for how to operate the interface. So again, that's if you know that you want to use a mural board in a meeting with your colleagues, have you sent them instructions in advance on how to actually engage with that activity? Nobody likes to be put on the spot, okay? So meeting invite, let people know that they're going to be using the tool and send them a video, send them a link to the website so they can look over it in their own time, okay? That's your multiple means of representation. Yet again, how are we given our instructions? And it's also multiple means of engagement. So people are being given the personal space to have a look at the work, make sure they know how to do it, okay? And then robust. So this is what I was getting at about, does this work with different devices and technologies? That could be assistive technologies, but as I said, it could also be mobile phone, iPad, tablet, okay? And that's our multiple means of expression. So once you've reflected on your users, these are things we can all do today. This are multiple means of representation and getting the basics right, okay? So when we're sending emails, when we're writing up meeting notes, when we're writing up our minutes, font size, minimum 12, okay? 24 if you're on a presentation. Sans serif fonts, what we mean by that is no curly bits. This is to do with literacy. It's the idea that when we're reading words, we're reading the landscape of the word rather than each individual letter. If you have a serif font, the flick actually interrupts the landscape of the letter, okay? No italics and try to avoid bold text, okay? Use headings. This is one I actually get asked about quite a bit, okay? If we think about headings for a sighted person, headings segment information. They allow us to skim and scan the information. We see a heading, we know we've got a new topic. It helps us to find what we're looking for. If you do not format your headings, if you just bold and underline that information, for a screen reader user or for someone who maybe, again, is using keyboard navigation, those aren't headings, they're just text. So for someone who uses a screen reader, that would be a person, usually a person with a visual impairment, the screen reader reads the entire web page or document to them, okay? They can use a keyboard shortcut so that they only hear the headings on a page. It is incredibly annoying to be sent a PDF document with no headings, okay? Imagine if someone removed all the headings for you and you were trying to find a particular chapter of a book, okay? Consider your reading age. So this is something that comes up a fairly bit when we look at statistics around accessibility on our websites. So the recommended reading age in the WCAG guidelines is 9 years of schooling, okay? So someone who has attended school for 9 years should be able to read and understand the information in your document or on a website. So you can actually get given the reading age of your document using Microsoft Word. It's included in the accessibility feedback. It's also listed on Silktide, which is the accessibility integration on Terminal 4. Now, where this really becomes an issue within the university is when it comes to jargon. An easy UDL way of approaching jargon is to offer glossaries, and our colleagues over in registry have done a really lovely job of actually making a UCD dictionary to help people navigate the university. Okay. Similarly, when we are providing people these helpful resources, we need to make sure that we embed the links. Okay. So if anyone has ever tried to share a page from InfoHub or Booking Center, you'll know those links are long and they're ugly and they don't really tell you where you're going. Okay. So really slick, easy way to address that is to write descriptive links. So when you'll see it there with Do the Arc training, write your text, highlight it, Control K, and you can paste in the link to where you want that to take the user. Okay. This is again really important for screen readers. If you're writing just click here, they can produce a list of all the links on a web page. Imagine the absolute chaos of a full web page and every single link says click here. Where am I going? What am I clicking? Why am I clicking? So descriptive links. It might seem a bit hostile that my slide here reads color contrast, aka our biggest accessibility crime, but I have the data to back it up. Within our Brightspace Ally feedbacks, color contrast is our biggest accessibility crime. Looking at the university social media, it is our biggest pitfall. Okay. When we think about color contrast, we're actually thinking of the luminosity of the colors. Okay. So classic example of color contrast, black and white. Okay. So we're not thinking of color in sort of a social context of pink and blue. We're thinking of the brightness of the colors. So a nice old school way of testing your color contrast is if you printed your design in grayscale, so printed it just in black and white, would you be able to differentiate between the different portions of your picture? Okay. Really important to remember that we perceive color in different ways as well. So we do have students, for instance, who would have color blindness. We do have students with visual impairment where color can be a real issue in terms of glare. Okay. And color contrast is also important for our pals who are working on mobile devices. If you've ever been out walking by the lake on a sunny day, actually reading poor color contrast on your phone can be difficult. There is a way to test your color contrast. So I'm going to hop out of my presentation mode and just actually show you how to do this. Okay. So on the screen, I've got a big red square. What I'm going to do, if I right click, if I go to my fill, more colors, custom, and what I have at the bottom here is a hex code. Okay. So this is the way that my color is made up. What I can do is I can copy my hex code. I can paste it into the WebAIM contrast checker. On this slide, I've got the codes for black and white. Paste your hex codes into the checker and it will tell you, based on the WCAG guidelines, are you meeting the standards for color contrast? Okay. I often say to my colleagues, don't wing it. Color contrast takes a little bit of time to be able to pick up. So do just use the checker because once you post your content to social media, if that's not accessible, if the color contrast is poor, That's a missed opportunity. So if you're working on Canva, when you actually hover over your color, it will tell you the hex code. If you have a brand toolkit, if you have colors you use all the time, it's worth investing that 10 minutes, take your toolkit, put it through the contrast checker. Does everything come up to standard? There you go. There's an accessibility win. You don't have to do it again. Okay. Are there any questions in the chat so far? No. Okay. So probably the most popular response when we are chatting about digital accessibility is alternative text, sometimes called alt text. What is alt text? So alt text is an image description. It's primarily associated with screen readers. It's what gets read out in lieu of a picture, whether that be on a website or in a document, okay? Alt text is also displayed on web pages when a user has poor internet or if they've changed their settings to be just in text mode. It's also read aloud by alternative format tools. So I know some of our pals who have done the Ally training were a little bit shocked when they listened to their journal articles that didn't have alternative text by just what's read out by the MP3 conversion, okay? And more recently, alt text is also displayed on Twitter for absolutely everyone, which I'm delighted about, because I think it's important that we do draw attention to these accessibility practices. But when we're also thinking about things like neurodiversity, it's really great that we have alt text on an image so people have a different way of approaching the image and understanding it. So this is not a trick question. It's to help you get into the habit of writing good alt text. Why do we use images? Why do we put pictures in our PowerPoints or on our website? Why do we use images? So some great answers coming in here. Break up long pieces of text. Yep. Grab attention. Brilliant. Sometimes a picture explains concept better than words. Yeah. A simpler message. So stripping things back. So things like process charts. Yeah. Visual aid. Yeah. Super. Yeah, sometimes we're talking about specific examples of things. Yeah, brilliant. So I think most of those were covered. So we use images for aesthetic purposes. So to add interest to a report or to break up a page. Alternative understanding. So that might be a graph of a table. It might be a flow chart of a written process. Complementary knowledge, so things like clarifying information, something about lab safety or checking understanding. So in art history, you might do slide tests. And then sometimes we do have unique images, so purely visual sources of information, things like maps. In terms of alternative text, it's important as a starting point to think about why we're using our image, because before we even write the text, that will determine whether we need to have alternative text, okay? So if we are using an image purely for aesthetic purposes, we don't need to add alt text. When we're thinking about screen reader users in particular, it's important to recognize that they are listening to information all day. That's a lot of information to process. It's a lot of information to take on board. If that image is not adding anything to the information, you can just tick it as no alt text and the screen reader will just ignore it. Now, it's important that you do mark it as no alternative text because otherwise the file name of the image will be read out, okay? We also don't necessarily need to use alt text if it's alternative understanding. So if the information is already conveyed in the written text, you don't have to add alternative text. Now, with things like graphs, I would be suggesting that you provide a table and that you signpost the table in your alternative text. But again, it's contextual, okay? But just to keep in mind that there is a little bit of thinking that goes before you even write your alt text in terms of considering the context and why the image is being used. So when we are writing alternative text, we're going to consider the context of the image. Why are you using it? Okay, so for instance, a picture of the Eiffel Tower in an architecture class is probably going to have slightly different alt text to a brochure on holidays in Paris, or even a picture of the Eiffel Tower for a module descriptor in an arts and humanities course. Be brief, okay? So remember that the person is listening to the alt text. So we don't need reams and reams of lovely prose. We're trying to convey the sentiment of the photo, what's happening, why is it there, okay? Avoid a picture of. So the screen reader will announce that there is an image. So you don't need to then say a picture of a cat. In contrast, if it's a particular medium, so if it's maybe a cartoon, if it is a screen grab of a particular software, you do need to specify that. The screen grab actually comes up a lot. So you might have seen on Twitter when people are doing guides on alternative text, sometimes companies will have just posted screen grab and not actually specified the software or where the screen grab is taken from. Okay, so do make sure you include that. And then, as I mentioned already, if an image is decorative, note this. So you now have the slides. In here, I have embedded links on how to add alt text to various platforms. So we've got our Microsoft and our Google, our Apple products, how to add alt text in HTML. Keep in mind on Terminal 4, when you add an image to your media bank, you have the option to write your alt text, okay? Twitter, again, please don't be one of those people who quite openly does not have alt text on your images. You can even turn on reminders so it won't let you post your picture without highlighting that you've forgotten your alt text. And then for our pals in mathematical disciplines, I've included Beamer because I know you don't use PowerPoint. So you can't add alt text on Beamer, but you can write good captions and image tags, okay? So I don't expect everyone to walk away from this as a WCAG trainer, okay? If you're not sure about something, check. And we do have automated testing tools. So if you are working on the Microsoft suite, if you're in your Microsoft Word, your PowerPoint, under the review tab, you have a button to check your accessibility. It also has links to resources that explain why certain accessibility practices are recommended. You have Ally in Brightspace. So I've got a screen grab from Brightspace on the board here. So that's under your module tools. You can see a full Ally report for your module content. There's Silktide in Terminal 4. If you work with Adobe, it also has an accessibility checker for your PDFs. Now, what I will say with all of these tools is it's an automated system. It's not going to be 100% foolproof. So this is where the work that we did at the start in considering barriers to how we access information and considering universal design really comes into effect. Okay, so it's making inclusive choices rather than having to try and remedy what's already there. Okay, and the next portion of the presentation is really going to talk about not just being compliant when it comes to our digital content, so these practical things like our alt text, but also taking a step further than that and being inclusive. Okay. So one of the easiest ways to promote digital inclusion is to add and support choice. I mentioned this at the start. It's adding different formats in how we convey our information. So our podcasts, our videos, our flowcharts. It's offering people multiple ways to get in touch with you. Okay, so under the WCAG guidelines, actually under the Web Accessibility Directive, we are supposed to offer users of our digital services ways to offer feedback. Okay, so email, phone, social media, a way to get in touch so that if something on your digital content isn't accessible, people can flag that to you, or they can request assistance to use a digital tool, or they can request an alternative format. Another way to add and support choice is to consider hybrid events. So keep in mind, particularly at the moment, a lot of folk, both professional staff and students, are commuting and can't stay in the evening. A lot of folk have care and responsibilities. So we now have the tools in UCD to offer hybrid events. And I would really encourage you to consider exploring that. I know it seems a little bit intimidating at the start, but our colleagues in estates are super helpful when it comes to all that audio visual stuff. Okay. And then review your content on multiple devices. So I've already pointed out that most students engage with Brightspace using a mobile device. Make sure that you do actually take a wee nosy at your website. Is everything resizing? Now, IT services have done a super job of making accessible templates now on Terminal 4. So do make sure that you upload the correct image file size. And then do make sure that you browse your web page on a mobile phone and that you check that everything's working as it should be. Also, consider the fact we love a PDF in the university. These, for the most part, are not reflowable. What I mean by that is that they do not automatically resize for screens. Now, if you use Adobe, they do now have their ink setting. But keep in mind that for the most part, if you're providing folk with a PDF and they're viewing it on their phone, they're probably going to have to scroll across and they're going to have a bad user experience because they don't resize. Okay. Accessible videos. So we have captioning here today. I know during COVID, captioning was a hot button topic. YouTube is your friend. If you are posting guides for students on how to use SysWeb, how to complete their registration, YouTube, really helpful. It does automated captions that you can then go back and edit. They also then have the option of turning the captions on and off, because while some folk may find captions very helpful, others may find them distracting. If we're posting to social media, we should be embedding captions. So if we're posting stories to Instagram, there is a sticker now that automatically generates captions. Same for TikTok. But if we're maybe posting to our grid, if we're maybe posting to Facebook, consider embedding captions in your content. If we're thinking about it, it's not just for folk who are hard of hearing. It can also be really helpful for the person on the bus that forgot their headphones. It can be helpful for the person who maybe just doesn't like listening to the information, who prefers to read. It's also a really quick way if someone is just scrolling aimlessly catching their attention by having your captions so they don't have to click into the video and listen to the whole thing. Okay. When we're designing videos, although we can think that videos are a really snazzy, cool, different way of conveying information, keep in mind that's still asking someone to concentrate for potentially 40 minutes if we're doing a lecture. So segment the information. Tell the person what's in the video and give them that option of skipping to the information that they actually need, okay? Captioning for live events. So some of you, I notice, have turned the captions on. We have a human captioner here with us today, okay? Human captioner is the best standard of captioning that you can give to a live event, okay? You can now have captions while you're at in-person conferences as well. So that's really beneficial for folk who are hard of hearing, but also for anyone who might have concentration difficulties or processing difficulties to yet again have another way of engaging with the information. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I'll always say, if you're running a conference and you can afford tote bags, you can afford a human captioner, okay? And I say this as someone who loves a tote bag, okay? If you don't have the option of a human captioner, so maybe you're a student and you're running an event, consider the PowerPoint live captions or consider the Zoom live captions, which will also give you a transcript. Now, obviously, these are automatically generated. As some of you may notice, I have an accent, so it doesn't always pick up things perfectly, but it's better than no captions. You can improve your automatic captions through things like making sure that you've got your microphone set up at your event or that you're wearing a headset. I'm not wearing mine today because I broke it yesterday. So apologies for that. Looking then at the other pillars of universal design, we've talked a lot about multiple means of representation, but it's also important to consider multiple means of engagement. So that's our sense of motivation. It's our purpose when we're studying or when we're engaging in educational activities. So a key part of that in our digital realm is actually celebrating difference. So I'm really glad this has become more and more of a topic within the university, but making sure that all learners are represented in your digital content. So instead of going for that stock image of happy, smiley, blonde students who are very tanned and loving life, making sure that you have pictures of happy students from different backgrounds, students with disabilities, students from different ethnic backgrounds, actually showing what our university looks like rather than the current poster for higher education. Okay. Use your pronouns in your email signature. Okay. It's such a small thing to do, but particularly for those of us in student support roles or those of us who maybe are students and running clubs and societies, it says that this is a safe space. I am a safe person to talk to. I am aware of what's going on in the world and that you're welcome to speak to me and I will meet you where you're at and how you are. Okay. Highlight supports. So it was a lovely piece of research done by DCU where they looked at student engagement and they found that students tended to thrive more in academic courses, so in terms of their grades and their attendance of courses, when their lecturer or their student support person addressed other needs and addressed the idea that they do have a life beyond the classroom. So things like if you are doing a module introduction or if you are doing a program orientation, pointing your students to other support services, whether that be disability support, whether that be mental health, whether that be saying, did you know you can borrow laptops from the library to write your essay? So acknowledging the world beyond the classroom or beyond the routine of academic life, okay? And just building on that, acknowledging that your students have lives, okay? So time estimates on course activities, but also time estimates for things like scholarship applications, time estimates if you need a student to fill out their module registration. When do you need that done by? How long does it take me to do my module registration? Okay. And making sure that we're offering tools that work on mobile devices. So a project that I've been working on for the last few years in my role here in UCD is widening access to assistive technologies. And it's something that means quite a lot to me. So it's the idea of, first of all, acknowledging that folk use assistive technologies. Aoife McNichol over in DCU has done really lovely research with students who are AT users about their motivations for using AT and when they tend to use their assistive technologies. So we have students who need to use amplification devices for their hearing aids. We have students who need to use adapted keyboards. We have students who use LiveScribe recording pens. They are more likely to retain their assistive technology when it is positively perceived both by their lecturers and support staff and by their peers. So things like making sure students know they're welcome to use their computer in the classroom, or they're welcome to use a recording device in a meeting with you so they can make sure they have all the information taken down. Normalizing assistive technology use, getting other people in the session to use assistive technologies. So we know that actually students, again, are more likely to retain their technologies when they have peer support rather than specialist support. So if we're maybe doing our course reading, signposting that you can use Immersive Reader in the Office suite to listen to the information, or you can use Census Access, which is available on the UCD All website, to convert that document into an MP3 file, or you can use Ally to download that application as HTML so you can work on it on your mobile phone. Okay, so ways of doing this include linking to these resources on your Brightspace page, or linking to them even on your Program Office web page on Terminal 4. And then just the last point that I want to make, multiple means of action and expression, and really meeting learners or users or colleagues or peers where they're at. Okay, so I know a lot of programs already do this, but signposting to students when they come in exactly what technology they're going to need to participate in their program or in the module. So for instance, if you are maybe doing a module where students have to build an e-portfolio, telling them exactly what platform they're going to be using and what digital skills they're going to need to do that, offering them instructions on any technology they wish to use, considering the VPAT, I've already mentioned this, for any tech that we're using, and I know that's being embedded in our procurement on a broader university level as well. Consider offering drop-in sessions or assistance with digital activities, and that includes things like module registration, that includes things like applying to the Student Welfare Fund, that includes things like applying to the Student Support Fund. Offer assistance with digital activities. We all have to learn at some point, so it's best to have that support person, that human connection. A lot of students can feel alienated by the digital realm. When I meet students, they'll often say, "Oh, I'm so rubbish at technology." Nobody's rubbish at technology. They just haven't been given the assistance to build the skill set that they need in that particular moment. And scaffolding then e-learning activities that we might be doing. Okay. So the summary of what we've hopefully learned today: there's no average user, there's no average student, there's no average colleague, no average peer. Challenge your assumptions. We all have assumptions. We all look at a particular situation and make our own determination of what's going on. It's entirely normal, but it's important to be aware of our assumptions. Offer choice and flexibility. So that's a really quick +1 that you can do today. So maybe you've got a team process that you're working on. Can that also be summed up as a flow chart or as an infographic? Okay. And then we don't have to do everything all at once. I know I've done a real whistle-stop tour of digital accessibility, but pick one thing, one small win. As a famous supermarket says, every little helps. This is a collaborative effort. And I suppose what's been really special about this session is that we've gathered people from all elements of the university to talk about assistive technologies and digital accessibility and digital inclusion. So I know I'm at time here. If you could pop your +1 in the chat, that would be really appreciated. I'll also hang around for a wee bit to answer any questions, or you can get me on the email as well.
Thanks very much, Emily. I'm sure everyone will agree that was really useful. See, Mary's going to add in her headings. That's fantastic. Good to see the +1s coming in. So as I said, we're going to share the recording of this session with everybody afterwards, and feel free to send it on to any of your colleagues who may find it useful. You've lots of good +1s coming in there, Emily. So alternative text, fantastic. Captions, not assuming that everyone has use of a computer. I think that's a really good one. It's one we definitely learned a lot about during COVID when we were working remotely. Tagged PDFs, which is great. Brilliant. So we might just draw the session to a close there to make sure that we're finishing on time. And even though it's Friday, everybody seems to still have lots of obviously teaching and other meetings and things like that to go through. So we'll send out the recording as soon as we have it available. And you have Emily's slides, but we'll send those as well. So thanks very much, Emily. And thanks everybody for attending. Happy Friday.